Welcome to Astrology in Psychotherapy. This is a regular podcast on the art and practice and experiences of working with astrology in psychotherapy. My name is Shauna McGrath. I'm a psychotherapist and astrologer, and I'm really excited to talk through with you some ideas that I had regarding this question that I get, which is, where do you see that in the chart? This often comes up when we're talking about something challenging that a person is trying to understand about themselves, something especially that they're maybe having a hard time with that feels elusive to them on how to actually change that. And so I was thinking about how I get this question pretty often, and I have some feelings about it. And I have I think that I was thinking about this because I often don't have a direct, clear cut, cookie cutter kind of answer to that. And there's not usually one place where I can say, I see that here in the chart. It's usually um, it's usually an exploration, actually. And so I wanted to share that and sort of talk through that because as I was thinking about this, it helped me to understand more of how I see and perceive the chart. So I want to thank you so much for listening. All of my work and what I share here is inspired by my clinical practice. I see clients and patients in private practice as a depth psychotherapist, and I incorporate astrology into the therapy process. Um, I absolutely love this work, and I consider it a spiritual practice because I learn so much from my patients, and I myself am transformed by this work. So, this podcast is a form of my creative expression to share with you what I'm most excited about at the moment. I hope that you'll take in what is interesting or resonant with you and leave anything else. Okay. So, yeah, sometimes I get this question when we're talking about something that a person has a challenge with. And I wanted to take the chart of the moment when I'm recording this and sort of walk through an example with you. But I will at the top here sort of outline what comes up for me um, when we say, where do you see that in the chart? And I want to also note that I ask myself this question. I ask, when I'm getting in my own psychotherapy for myself, when I get readings, I also want to know, well, yeah, like where do you see that in the chart? Like, how can I figure that out and like really dial into that piece that I'm having a hard time with? And so I think it's a very natural question that comes from wanting to better ourselves and to understand ourselves. So, a couple different things. I realized when this question comes up is that I actually see the chart as a synthesized being, which makes sense because it is a chart of you, a being that is, has all of these different complicated, nuanced, and contradictory kind of ways of being. As humans, we're sort of like a walking synthesis of contradictions. And so I see the chart that way. I find that it's very difficult for me, at least these days, to read a chart in a way that is like part parts based. Like I find that it's difficult for me to say, okay, we're gonna now talk about your Venus, and then we're gonna talk about your moon. And I find that I sort of like uh move around the chart, that I sort of swim around in the chart, and it often feels like I'm kind of letting the chart lead me to enter into the chart. And so there is this element of it that is non-linear, that is more spatial, that is more feeling toned. And um, of course, that is not the only way to read a chart. That is just what I am finding about myself. And I think that there can be a lot of value in reading it in a linear way. And I think especially when we're starting out, that having like a scaffolding of, okay, I look at this first, and then I look at this, and then I look at that. I think that can certainly be helpful to sort of ground us. And I can think of sometimes when I do that. But I think overall, when I get this question, I'm like realizing that I sort of swim around in the chart. So that's one piece, is that it's sort of like a synthesized being. And then also, I have realized that I'm always looking for repeating themes that amplify something. So this can be where I see different signatures in the chart that amplify one another, that mirror one another, or that modify or maybe contradict one another. I do find though when there's a repeating theme that those kinds of themes tend to um, be more expressive in a person's experience. And so I think this also comes up when there's the question of where do you see that in the chart? I think that often I'm saying I see that in many different places, in many different ways. And another piece of this too is that, which is one of the challenges I think of astrology, is that astrology, in my experience, is incredibly relational in that it comes alive when we look at it together, when we look at astrology with another person. There is something magical that happens. And I think that that's why it's so hard for us to read our own charts or to, even read our own energy or to understand ourselves psychologically. I think this is why I love both astrology and psychotherapy because both, um, in the way that I experience them, are highly relational and um, that there's something alchemical that happens when we feel seen and heard and we feel presenced with another person. There is something that happens there. Um, I'm thinking about how the psychotherapist and Jungian analyst Donald Kalshed said that uh, trauma, especially attachment trauma, is a relational phenomenon, happens in relationship. And so we need relationship in order to heal from relational trauma. And I think this is the gift and the beauty of psychotherapy. And so I think about astrology as being relational a lot, especially because um, there's one style, or I guess I would say it's like a branch of astrology that is the astrology of questions. Maybe you've heard of this. It's called horary astrology, spelled Horary. And it's this practice, this idea that when we have a burning question that comes to mind, we can cast a chart for the moment that we have that question, and the chart will answer the question. Um, now, what practitioners of horary astrology have found is that horary, it usually works best. It usually answers the question reliably when it is like a really important question that the person is asking, like they really want to know or they really need to know. There's sort of this desire there. Uh, and they engage with someone else. They engage with an astrologer. And so I think this is fascinating, and I find it very mystical. Don't fully there's like, maybe this is an episode for another day. I don't fully understand why this is the case, but I find it absolutely fascinating that this even works, that there is this practice where we can ask a question spontaneously and astrology can answer it. And also, even further, that process works better when we're asking someone else outside of ourselves this question. When we are entering into a relationship, there is something alchemical that happens. There's this, Carl Jung would call it the synchronicity of the moment. And I'm bringing this up. You might be like, Shauna, why are you? This is a big side tangent, but I'm bringing this up because I experience astrology as highly relational. And I think that when someone asks me, where do you see that in the chart? I see us as looking at it together and exploring it together in that moment, and that there's going to be something different that comes up in that space versus another point in time or another person, or maybe I'm answering the same question at varying different times. There is something in that moment, in that time, in that relationship where the astrology reveals itself by the nature of our being there together. And so I think ultimately, when when we ask this question, where do you see that in the chart? I think not where, but I think how do I see that in the chart is kind of what I'm feeling into. um because where is kind of like we're looking for the thing. And um I think in Western society, I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, we really like to have one specific thing that we can point to and say, ah, this is it. I have found the answer. Um, but when we ask how, that really allows more space for exploration and curiosity. And ultimately, that space of curiosity is how healing works. That is, and I think I'm gonna make a separate episode on this, like the state of curiosity, and that is so core, so essential to our healing process, is to have a um, as much as we can conjure up uh, a presence of inquiry and curiosity and looking for, okay, like what's going on here? How do we see this working out? And so, okay, so to ground this in an example, so I have a chart here if you care to follow along. If not, it's absolutely not necessary. Just let this all sort of wash over you. If anything doesn't make sense, you just let it flow through. So this is for April 8th, 2024, 12:41 p.m. Pacific time in San Diego, California. So this would put the rising at about 27 degrees of Cancer. Um, and in this chart, there's a packed 10th house, Mercury, Moon, Sun, Chiron, MC, North Node, and Venus are all in Aries in the 10th house. And so let's say let's say this is someone's birth chart and they are in psychotherapy with me. And one of their challenges is uh, that they are having a hard time around communication, that it's difficult for them to express themselves, that they're having like a lot of like maybe they they find themselves talking a lot, but like either being misunderstood or not coming off very clearly. They often feel misunderstood. Um, they have some writing projects that they are working on, that the articles that they're wanting to publish, but they're having a hard time sort of, like it's not, maybe it's writer's block, maybe it's something where they're just having a hard time sort of putting things together. And this is causing them a lot of stress and anxiety because they feel misunderstood, therefore, sort of not as connected with people as they would like to be. And then also there are these like looming deadlines that are happening with writing projects. And so they're like, okay, Shauna, like what is happening with my communication situation? Where do you see this in the chart? And so I would look at a few different things here. I think certainly I would want to acknowledge that um, yes, even now my mind is, like, going to all the different directions, and I wanna just, like, almost, like, I don't know, like, word vomit or download everything to you all at once. So, I think with Cancer rising, there is a higher sensitivity, and, folks with Cancer rising, they really are, like, picking up a lot of what's in the room, and um they're usually very attuned to other people and like if someone else is feeling uncomfortable or there's something that's like a little like they're reading some kind of weird energy in the room that usually affects them. And so I think that's also that's like something that's sort of just a tone for us to acknowledge that this is a person who is sensitive to the environment and is sensitive to others. And that sometimes for Cancer rising people, that can be overwhelming. And then, of course, if you are have a sensory overload, then that is going to affect your ability to think and to communicate. So we want to keep that in mind. Um, the other piece of what I am immediately drawn to, of course, is this cluster of energy here in Aries in the 10th house. And I'm looking at a couple different things. I'm looking at Mercury being in Aries, um, Mercury being the planet of thought process and communication. And Mercury is in Aries, so you would think, oh yeah, like and in the 10th house, this person is like bold about their communication and they love to talk and share and they can speak directly. I think Mercury in Aries in the 10th house can be conducive to someone who really loves to have like spirited debates or argumentation. Um, or maybe they love to uh, be contradictory or to like do any kind of writing or speaking where they're sort of having like a critique of something. Mercury's here with the moon and the sun, and so there's also this theme around like a love. I think like it is so important for this person to speak and to feel seen, and that maybe even their work or their vocation may involve something where they're writing or speaking, especially in a way that maybe advocates or fights for something or brings a sense of inspiration and like even like activism to their community or to someone else. That sort of like fighting for something Aries energy. Now, what I'm really drawn to, though, is that Mercury is retrograde here. And uh, when Mercury is retrograde, it can mean a couple of different things. So typically, folks who have Mercury retrograde in their birth chart, they tend to process information in a different way. They tend to um, take in info and communicate it out in a way that maybe is not typical or the norm. Um, for some folks, that can mean that they really have a hard time putting words to things. There might have been challenges early in life around finding the right words or figuring out how to say things in a way that's received by others well. There could have been a tendency to maybe not want to talk or a tendency to talk. I think there can also be a tendency to like feel like you're saying a lot, but you're not getting your point across. Like maybe I think Mercury retrograde natally also is like things may feel so clear in your head, but then when you try to actually express it, it's just like it's not even, you can't, it's difficult to express what's in your head out in verbal form or to do that in a way that is satisfactory to you. Um, it may often feel for this person like they have to put in more effort than most people do in order to communicate. And so, um, regardless of what it is, I think also Mercury retrograde is a symbol more practically that maybe possibly there is some neuro divergence here. This person processes linear info in a different kind of way. And Mercury is also connected to the nervous system. And in this chart, it's fairly closely conjunct to the moon, which is a symbol of the body, the personal unconscious, the intuition, and kind of like our somatic experience day to day, how we're feeling emotionally and physically. And when I'm seeing this Mercury retrograde with the moon, I'm seeing a person who maybe is like very sensitive to sensory experiences, to their environment. Um, there may be a tendency to like overthink and kind of like get like really worked up, and then sort of get lost in the mind and not be able to process things to where you feel like you have a sense of completion. So all of this, I'm like, okay, there's something here around. Um, I'm going back to the Cancer rising, and of course, the moon being the ruler of the chart. So the ruler of the chart is the person themselves, and then there's this strong connection to like a very kind of like um, a Mercury that does things very differently, a different kind of way of thinking or communicating. So I'm wondering if this person, a part of their challenge is that they get overwhelmed easily. And then I'm also now drawn to the North Node in Aries, and I'm wondering if they sort of get drawn away from their own experience because they're uh, thinking about what other people are going to think or what other people are going to say or how their words affect others, so much so that they become sort of like wrapped up in thinking about the repercussions of how they're going to say things that they kind of lose what they actually are even wanting to say, that they get sort of like um wrapped up in everyone else's thoughts and feelings, and then they get very far away from what they're doing, feeling, or thinking. I'm also so I think that's a part of that too. And I'm saying that because when someone has North Node in Aries and South Node in Libra, there can be a natural tendency to prioritize and to tune into the needs and thoughts and feelings of others versus oneself. And so this person, this hypothetical person, uh, a big part of their experience, I imagine, is probably around figuring out how to prioritize their own needs, thoughts, feelings, and desires, and how to like root into themselves, and then how to communicate what it is that they're feeling, and that the communication piece is really key. It's not enough that they have an experience of being empowered and embodied in themselves. There is something that involves them sharing that or communicating that in a very public way that's really important. And so I can see for this person how not feeling like they're doing that is like really, really painful, because it is such a part of of their path in this world. It's a part of their healing process. I also want to say too, I think it's very interesting in this chart that the sun rules the second house of the voice and speech and the throat even. Sun, I'm saying that because in this chart we have Cancer rising, and then on the second house we have Leo. Leo's ruled by the sun. And then also Mercury rules the third house. Virgo is on the third house. And so we have the third house of communication and so second house is like communication verbally, like your voice. And then third house, in contrast, is communication via writing. So I think it's very interesting that we have clustered uh, the ruler of the first house, the second house, and the third house. They're all clustered together, the moon, the sun, and Mercury. And they're all up here in the 10th house in Aries. And there's such a focus point of energy here. And so, what else did I want to say about this? Oh, yeah. So, I also wanted to say when I'm looking at this chart and I'm feeling into this like challenge around communication, I'm very drawn to Mars very closely conjunct Saturn in Pisces. And this is in the ninth house, which is the house, among other things, of public speaking. It's also about publishing, traveling. It's about anything where we expand our mind in some way. It's also related to higher education. And so I'm wondering, with Mars conjunct Saturn, if there's a part of this person that maybe feels like a little like maybe there's an inner critical voice, especially around their writing and how it's going to be received. I don't know, but I wonder that. I wonder if that's also a part of the block here, part of the dynamic that happens. And I wonder how that works for them. I wonder um, when they imagine sharing their work, what comes up for them. And I'm saying that because with Mars Saturn, there can kind of be a tendency sometimes towards fearing conflict, fearing judgment, maybe feeling not good enough in some ways. Um, Of course, many of us, most of us experience these different feelings and some at some level at different points, different phases of life. And, these are all common human experiences. And the fact that this Mars is so close to Saturn, there's something here around maybe this is a part, and that it's in the ninth house that is about publicly sharing your thoughts. There's something here maybe around um, feeling like you need to work really hard to get stuff done to share something, or that maybe you won't get the reception that you most desire. There's something in there maybe. And so we've kind of walked around the chart a bit here. Um, I think so in this, it's funny, we haven't even looked at the transits too. So that's probably something I would look at as well. But so yeah, so when we're talking about this, like, okay, like where do you see my challenge with communication and writer's block? Where do you see that in the chart? We've talked about the ruler of the chart. We've talked about the rulers of the second and third house. We've talked about the planets, the moon, the sun, Mercury, um, the nodes. Uh, I would want to talk about Chiron and Venus, but for the purpose of not being super lengthy here, I'm not going to go into those in this moment. So we've talked about that. We've also talked about the themes of the 10th house and Mars and Saturn, and maybe the ninth house being involved in this equation. And so, now, of course, a part of what we didn't do today is like I would want to know more about what this person's experiences are like and how that is working for them. And depending upon the amount of time that we've been working together, I would, I would have a bit of history also on, just experiencing, getting to know a person in psychotherapy and how this is working with them. And we would talk about this together. Um, so that's a bit of I how I experience the chart, especially when we're looking at, okay, like how do we see this in the chart? Um and on that note, I would wonder what what came up for you as I'm talking about these ideas. Uh this is an entering for me an entering into this process of sharing a bit more about my experiences in working with astrology and psychotherapy. It is something that I'm very excited about, and I find that I always have new like thoughts that are coming up, and so this is a part of my process, a new thing that I'm trying to share with you. And so I would love to hear from you on how this landed with you, especially if you found like the chart example helpful or a little, maybe it was boring. I don't know. um, my hope is that my hope is with this podcast to get you thinking, to get you thinking about your own experiences and how you view astrology and what you think. That this is sort of like a springboard for contemplation for you. So we'll leave it there today, to sort of wrap up around this conversation. Where do you see that in the chart? Um, for me, it's more about not where, but how do we see it in the chart, that we're doing that relationally, that we're looking at repeating themes that amplify or modify one another, and that ultimately the chart is a synthesized being. It's a symbol of you. So lovely to be here with you today. Again, my name is Shauna McGrath. I am a psychotherapist and astrologer. If you're interested in learning more about me and my work, you can find that on my website, theastropsyche.com. Wishing you well, and I'll connect with you again soon. Bye.